All right, so second video here for groups and organization. And now we're going to look at some of the content that comes out of studies that sociologists have done of groups. And and this is going to be looking at how they interact and kind of the outcome of group behavior here. And for a note here, and I'm not going to go through all of these as well, but a heads up on for the assigned reading for this topic from the online textbook written by Little. Make sure he goes through what are essentially really classic experiments that have been done by psychologists or social psychologists. So this is one area where there's a lot of overlap between psychology and sociology. But make sure you read and get familiar with these three studies. One done by Stanley Milgram, and I believe that was known as the shocking experiment, where he had people thinking they were administering shocks to another person. The Solomon Asch study, which is, I believe it's the one where a group of people, and they were asked to identify, I'm drawing on here, they would be given an image, and they would say, okay, which line is longer or shorter? And they had sort of people in there that were giving misleading answers, and they wanted to see if people would go along with the group or the wrong answers to avoid embarrassing themselves in a social group. So that's Solomon Asch's research. And then the Philip Zimbardo prison study, which is kind of a classic study in sociology, psychology, where they had, chosen random people, made some of them prisoners, some of them guards, and kind of watched how they interacted. So these are really classic studies, and we learned a lot about, in particular, group behavior, in particular, the conditions under which people conform to the group rules and norms and or leadership within a group setting there. Now, these studies also give us they give us a lot of insights into why people engage in behavior that they might not otherwise have done, would it not have been for the fact that they were influenced by the group dynamics. In this section of the online textbook, Little also introduces really briefly the concept of group think. I want to explore it a little bit because it is a very important sort of sociological concept here. And so I'm going to add to Little's discussion of that here in the lecture videos. So groupthink has been used to define the tendency of a group members to conform to decisions and actions and that sort of thing of the group by adopting a narrow view on some issue. And what groupthink has been applied to has been it's been applied to define how groups come to make wrong or bad decisions, or decisions and actions that have really bad outcomes. So the understanding is that group decision making sometimes backfires and leads to bad outcomes, and that is because it's been argued by sociologists. It's because rather than examining a problem or an issue from many different points of view, the groups seek consensus, which then narrows the range of options and narrows their range of focus on that issue or that problem. Then, because they're trying to seek consensus, they settle on a decision or an action, but they haven't fully considered all of the implications, which is then what often gives rise to a problem or negative or harmful outcomes. Now, the sociologist who developed this term, Irving Janis, to develop this term and this theory, he studied things like the Pearl Harbor bombing that happened during the Second World War. He also studied the Vietnam War and the Bay of Pigs invasion. Later on, others, and this concept became quite synonymous with the 1986 explosion of a space shuttle, the Challenger space shuttle. It and the group think was determined to have happened in that case because the engineers had been, had identified a potential, problem with some feature of the space shuttle, but they locked themselves into group think and didn't fully anticipate that little problem becoming a bigger problem, which ultimately made the space shuttle, explode as it was being launched, killing all members of astronauts on board. So what Janice and others have done is they've created kind of the key features of groupthink, which are now often applied to, again, instances of when there's been like a disaster or some unfortunate event or decisions to go to war or aggression. We can often sort of see evidence of groupthink in those instances. So without going too much into detail here, because it is a rather kind of advanced topic here, but very helpful, I guess, given that we have a lot of weird things happening that are the result of group behavior. So groupthink involves the sense of invulnerability, which means members of the group are so overly optimistic that they are willing, optimistic about their own capabilities and what they can do and accomplish, that they are unwilling to take extraordinary risks, that they are willing to take extraordinary risks and unwilling to heed any signs of danger. So they get overly, optimistic and confident, and maybe not really valid confidence, but that makes them take risks. And when you up the stakes of what they're doing, that risk taking becomes more common. There's a collective rationalization, which means the group will ignore any warnings as irrelevant to what they're doing. They won't reconsider any of the assumptions upon which they're taking action. Morality, this means that so convinced that the group is on the right side of the issue, they ignore the ethical or moral consequences of their decision. Stereotype views of outgroups. So this is one of our definitions that we've looked at this week. Stereotype views of outgroup means that the members of the group will see themselves as the good guys, and anyone who goes against them as the bad guys, and then they work to sort of, to keep up that narrative by, anyone who's opposing them or has a different sort of point of view, they get constructed as being evil or weak or stupid, and therefore that, serves as rationalization, justification for not, considering what that out group has to contribute to this decision making that the group is doing. Fifth, there's direct pressure on those people who are dissenters. Those who disagree are put under pressure to keep quiet and not disrupt the process. There's self-censorship. So even if a member of the group feels that maybe we're not doing the right thing, or we've forgotten something, or this is amoral, many members will not express any of that, and so they self-censor themselves, and that voice doesn't get put into play. There's an illusion of unanimity, where the group leadership mistakes the pressured and that self-censored majority view for, an unanimous, decision that is being made. Thus, by saying, well, everyone agrees, so this must be, the way to go, so let's do this. And then finally, the groupthink always involves self-appointed mind guards, which sounds really cool, where certain members play the role of a protector of the leader and they protect the leader and shield them from any information or ideas that might be contradictory to the group's decision. And so, yeah, so the sort of all of these things have been identified, as I noted, in those kind of historical events. Again, the Pearl Harbor bombing during the Second World War, the Vietnam War, the Bay of Pigs invasion, Challenger explosion. And some of the reasons why groupthink occurs, and this is where those previous other experiments, the Ash and Milgram's experiments in particular, help sort of feed into this, is that groupthink will often occur under certain conditions. So there are prior conditions. So the group is, meaning the group is often a very isolated group and a cohesive decision-making group. They lack impartial leadership, and particularly any group that's working in a high stress environment, which is why, for example, 3 of the 4 examples I gave previously, 1, 2, 3, yeah, were like war and military sort of context. The Challenger and NASA, that's a high stress environment as well. Other reasons why groupthink will happen is that people, as people are people, and we generally try to avoid conflict. And as we saw, that, leads to, self-censorship, and this sort of not wanting to go against the majority there. Fear of being wrong and therefore embarrassed in front of the group is a feature of why this will happen. Fear of being shunned by the more powerful members of the group also, can account for why people self-censor and just go along with what they might think is a wrong decision. And people are just generally also unsure of themselves, their status or position within a group. They want to be part of the group, and so we adapt to go along with decisions in that way. So as I mentioned, so you've listed, you're likely a member of several different groups in your life at the moment. Can you think of an example of either your own or someone else's behavior that might be reflective of an element of groupthink, and particularly going back to kind of these particular key features there? So might you have, started to go along with groupthink, or looking at another group that you're familiar with, other people's behavior that is reflective of this? Okay, so we'll end the video here with looking at the journal post question. And this is one where I think you might be able to use for, depending on the issue, the current issue or event that you chose for journal post number 1. And so, for instance, is that an issue or an event, particularly if it was a sort of a negative or a harmful event or issue? Is there a group of people that are responsible, potentially for that issue or that event? And was that maybe the result of, and is there any evidence of groupthink involved in that? And you don't have to, if there is, you don't have to sort of account, for example, for all of the 8 features of groupthink. 1 or 2 of them probably would be sufficient for this journal. You're not writing whole essays here, so just want to see if you can see a real life example of some of these concepts here. All right, that's this video. I'll start another video.